Welcome back. State Representative Alex Miller shocked the local political world recently when she announced she was quitting just months after being elected for the first time. As we just saw, Miller is citing a number of reasons. For one, she didn't realize the extent of the time commitment required to do the job. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Even more interesting, her comments about the cutthroat inter-Republican Party politics. Miller claims she was stripped of her preferred committee assignments because she backed the losing candidate in the race for Republican House leadership, as well as her refusal to always vote the way leadership directed her to. Joining us for more is Rod Thompson, the president of the Sarasota Republican Club, former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Zach Anderson, the political editor of the Herald Tribune. Gentlemen, welcome to the broadcast. Keith, let me start with you. As I just said, I'm really kind of curious about Representative Miller's contention that she didn't know about the hours that she would have to put in, that she thought it was just a couple of months a year for the legislative session. I would imagine if you apply for a job, you would know what the hours were beforehand.
Well, I guess my take on it is a little bit different. I would compliment her for the thoughtfulness of her response and the insight she gained. Remember, when you're recruited to do that job, they want your name on the ballot, and they will tell you a lot of stuff. I was a little more knowledgeable about how things worked. I'm a college professor, studies political science. But I will say, the day after I was elected, they called a special session, and I had to go to Tallahassee right away, and I was finishing up my semester, and I really hadn't thought about that as a possibility. I thought there was going to be this transition and I would work into it. So I don't think that that's shocking that she found out when she got there that it was very different than what she had imagined.
Rod, how shocked was the local Republican community?
Well, this part was very shocked, and I'm pretty well plugged in, so I think we were all very surprised at her decision. I would say surprised and disappointed at her decision. You know, I thought she would actually be a very good legislator. I backed her in her campaign. I helped her in her campaign, supported her, had her speaking at our club. I thought she'd be a good legislator. Yeah, there are a lot of hours involved and time involved, time commitments. One reason why I could never be in the legislature is because I couldn't commit that sort of time to it. But I would have thought she would know that going into it. She had been talking to a lot of people. And I really feel like that if she would have stuck it out, she could have come back. For whatever reason, she lost her committee assignments. That's not that unusual. I mean, if you go back a ways, and Keith might remember this, that Jim Boyd backed the wrong person in his early years, but he's worked his way up now the way he's number 3 in the legislature. So, you know, it takes time and understanding the process, a little bit of patience, a little bit of compromise, all those things that are not always in a CEO's wheelhouse, and that might be part of her issue and challenge.
Zach, we're going to get into this more in the next segment, but just how difficult had Alex's position become within her own party up there?
I think it had become fairly difficult, you know, as she talks about, she spoke with me about this and she's spoken with other reporters. It's a very top-down driven process in the legislature, especially in the House. The senators have more independence. In the House, you have 120 members and there's a very big emphasis on, on being reliable, on towing the party line, on voting for these big bills because they really need to keep people together to pass them. And she was kind of more with the leadership than not, but she took a few votes that they didn't like, and she was punished for that. And I think that was a big part of her decision, that she didn't like that she couldn't have a lot of independence. And then there was another factor where, she was involved in a leadership race for her class. They picked the future speakers very early in the House, and she backed the wrong candidate. And I think she got demoralized a bit by that and the fact that, she would not have as much clout potentially going forward.
So she was penalized by the current leadership, and then she was not in a good position with the future
exactly.
leadership.
And in the House, everything is about leadership, and leadership controls everything. They control your committee assignments. They control what kind of office you're going to have, whether you get a nice office or a not so nice office. And she lost her 2 favorite committee assignments on health care, which she's an expert on.
All right, we are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on the sudden resignation of State Representative Alex Miller right after we check the First Alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the sudden resignation of State Representative Alex Miller, and joining us for more is Rod Thompson, the president of the Sarasota Republican Club, former State Representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Zach Anderson, the political editor of the Herald Tribune. Keith, let me ask you, picking up on our conversation here in terms of backing the wrong horse within her own political party's leadership race and occasionally going outside the preferred direction of the current House leadership. How unusual is that, and what does it say about the way things are running up in Tallahassee right now?
Well, that kind of event of people being punished if they get out of line is very common. But the idea that you may never recover from an initial wrong choice is a fairly new phenomenon, and it's a bad thing. So, you know, party leaders have to, from the time Henry Clay sort of made parties the central way that you run legislators back in the 19th century, leaders used carrots and sticks to keep people in line. This phenomenon of just putting people on a long-term path to being on the margins is a fairly recent phenomenon. I don't think it's good. I always felt with our local delegation, as a Democrat, I actually had extra juice because there were times when the Republican leadership needed to talk to the Democratic leadership, and I was in it. And some of my colleagues had gotten crosswise with the leadership, and they couldn't get in the door of the leader's office to talk. And so this is a real shift in the way we do things, and I really wonder if our institutions are serving us well with this model.
And it's been a real problem for this particular district because this district is more moderate than a lot of Republican districts in the state. It's not a heavy Republican district. It leans Republican, but not by a huge margin. So for her to be responsive to her voters, she has taken some more moderate positions. She took some positions against abortion restrictions that she, it seems like, was punished for. And she did some other things that were more along the moderate line. And her predecessor in that seat, Ray Pilon, also was punished for taking more moderate positions, and it seems like one of the reasons that he left that seat before his term limits were up. So it hurts the effort. If you want a more moderate view in the legislature, it definitely makes that more difficult when you're punished for that.
Rod, I know you want to jump in there, but let me ask you this question because you know, the legislature is overwhelmingly Republican. We live in a Republican area, but I would imagine Republicans viewing that interview right now would be upset not only with maybe Representative Miller's decision to leave, but also what is going on with our party up in Tallahassee.
Well, they may, but if they're informed beyond just the interview, I think they might understand a few things. Number one, Joe Gruters voted against party leadership way more this past session than Alex did, and yet he did okay. Now, he was on the right side of the leadership vote going forward, but he doesn't have everything he wants either. Look, this is a long-term process, as we know, and as Keith knows, as other legislators know, and I point out Representative Boyd, he's still in the legislature, and it was only a few years ago that he voted wrong, and he's now number 3. You can work your way back, but it takes a process and ability. I think part of the challenge for Alex was that she's been a CEO, and as we see, whenever CEOs, like Governor Scott, took a couple of years to find his footing on how to act in a political environment. When you're a CEO, just one of a large body like in the House, I think that's a very difficult transition, and I think it was for her.
I want to get into another area, but even within the local legislative delegation, there were some knives out there, wasn't there, Zach?
Yeah, so Alex Miller and Joe Gruters were on different sides of the leadership battle, and there was some intrigue that got out and was publicized, and you know, so there was. It's pretty cutthroat in the legislature. People are trying to advance, and sometimes you know, people are looking out for their own best interests. And
in politics, really?
Quite a bit. And so you know, there was a little bit of tension there because they were on different sides of the leadership battle, and there was some behind-the-scenes intrigue that kind of got publicized and blew up in their face a little bit.
You know, but I would encourage people not to just think about it as local and not just think about it right here, because this is a national phenomenon. We're more partisan, and this is an objective thing. You can look at the statistics. Everybody agrees with this. We're more partisan today than we've been in almost any time in American history. Last time we were this partisan before the Civil War. Not a good measure of things. And that partisanship often reflects a base that's pretty far away from the center. So it means that you have people fighting from the edges. And when you have these one-party states, as we have in Florida, and by the way, in case you think that's, being partisan, I would agree New York has the same problem. You don't get a kind of a conversation and a meeting in the middle where different people can sort of move incrementally. And I think that's a bad thing for our country.
Well, that leads into a very good segue here with another comment that Alex Miller talked about, and that is the influence of lobbyists and the leadership up in Tallahassee. Rod, a lot of the folks in your party love term limits, believe in it everywhere, but she seems to be saying that because legislators are in and out within a fairly short period of time, the real decisions up there are made by lobbyists and staff and leadership, and that's not a good thing.
That's not an unreasonable argument, but it's not all of the argument. That's the case against term limits at the county commission level, too.
Is it a good case?
It is if you just take it all by itself. But there's more to it than that. And I think part of the problem really is, and we might diverge in opinion here, but part of the problem is the size and scope of government requires this massive amount of staff and bureaucracy to be running a $80-some billion government annually in Florida, a $1 billion government in just Sarasota County, so that you really can't, it's really difficult then for citizen legislators, our idealistic view of it, to come in and really understand it. However, I will say that through the process over a number of years, as they work into leadership more and have more influence, they do understand it better then. If the charge is that lobbyists have undue influence, sure, universal. It's been that way kind of for a long time. It's that way in spades in Washington. But I would say that is partially term limits, but it's also partially the size, scope, and complexity of government.
And by the way, you might be surprised to hear me say this, but I agree with that. And there's a concept that was cooked up by conservative economists called rent-seeking. And what that means is that you'll have private firms who try to get a monopoly or some other uncompetitive situation through exclusive contracts with the state. And I'll tell you what, if you go to both Washington and particularly Tallahassee, 80% of the time they're working on rent-seeking. And that's where the interest groups come in. And they end up giving us more obligations for our tax dollars, but they're really delivering not competition, but exclusive contracts to specific vendors.
You know, Zach, I've always heard that when new legislators get up there, they're still trying to find out where the closest bathroom is, and that the real show is run by the staff and the lobbyists there. Is there a growing appreciation that is problematic at the legislature, or is nothing likely to change?
I don't think anything's likely to change. Term limits are fairly popular with the public. I doubt that they would try and reverse term limits, and if they did, it probably wouldn't pass. And there's a lot of things you can do other than getting rid of term limits to limit the influence of lobbyists, but they haven't really been that aggressive in doing that. They did a little bit last session. The Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran, did some things where he made lobbyists disclose what bills they were working on in the House, and he made lawmakers put their name on any earmark requests. And there are some things that you can do to limit the influence of money and lobbyists on politics, but they can go a lot further. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people fighting against that because they don't want that disclosed, and they don't want to see their influence diminished. So it might be something that happens to happen at the ballot box. But ethics reform would go a long way to limiting the influence of lobbyists.
We only have about a minute left, and I want to talk about the race to replace Alex Miller in a moment. But first, I mean, do voters in Sarasota, in this district, have a right to be upset that they're going to have to fork up another $400,000 or so to have a special election to replace somebody who they just elected?
Yes, yes, and yes. They do have a right to be upset. The party that backed her and spent money on her has a right to be upset. And that is all on Alex. She could have finished out her term. One more year. And this is where the grave disappointment comes in her for me. And that is that we shouldn't have to be going through this at all. The whole process should have waited another year.
Keith?
I don't know Alex Miller. I'll defend her in this respect. When I saw that interview, my impression of her and view of her was elevated a lot, because I think what she came into is she recognized there are some profound problems the way this works and just couldn't countenance it.
Okay, we have to take a quick break. Final thoughts when we return. Our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. Zach, I'm going to begin with you. We're going to have a special election. Where does it stand?
You know, it's really interesting. There was a development this week that I think has buoyed some of the Democrats in the state, where you saw a Senate district down in Miami that was a district that Trump won, or not Trump won, that Clinton won, but was held by a Republican. You know, that a Democrat won that district. So, I mean, this special election for the House district here in Sarasota, it's a Republican-leaning district, and it's not like that district down in Miami in the sense that Trump won it by 5 percentage points, but the Democratic Party has gotten behind one candidate, Margaret Good, and they think that she has a decent shot at it. When the special election first started, James Buchanan came out immediately after Miller resigned, and I think a lot of people thought that he was going to have a hard time being defeated. He's got the Buchanan name. His father is in Congress. He's raised a lot of money. This is a Republican-leaning district. The fact that Democrats are getting behind a candidate, and it seems like the state party might be investing in a candidate, could mean that they think that they have a shot here, but there's another Democrat in the race, so there's going to be a primary. There's a Libertarian in the race. There's one other Republican who has sort of been making intimations that she might get in the race, so it could be a pretty big, wide-open contest.
Keith, I know there's been some speculation that you would jump into this race. You haven't yet, unless you want to announce something right here, right now.
Well, no, I'm not running in this race. And I think there are 2 live candidates on the Democratic side, and I think that's actually a good thing, because it's very difficult to get any visibility in a special election. Most people don't pay any attention. Having 2 might actually help. And the big challenge for the Democrats is to get out the vote, because the voting electorate contracts in a special election, and it just happens to be the case. It tends to contract more for Democrats than Republicans here. Having a primary might stir people up and get them interested and maybe make a difference.
But given the results of the election in November, where Alex Miller won handily over Ed James III, is there any evidence out there right now that things would be any different?
Well, if you look at that particular district, and I did, Hillary Clinton lost to Trump in that particular district by about 4 points, as did Frank Alcock to Greg Steube. So it's not as crazy an imbalanced district as we're used to around here. I see a 4-point district, 5-point district, if you want to put it that. It's a pretty competitive district.
So, Rod, you have James Buchanan running, the son of the former congressman. Is it a gimme for the Republicans?
No, it's not a gimme, but it would be a big upset if he were to lose. He's got name recognition. He's got a lot of...
He hasn't earned himself.
No, that doesn't matter. Neither did Clinton's daughter. The name recognition just matters. I'm just talking about when you go to vote. So he's got name recognition, and he's got money. He's the party is neutral during the primary, but he's going to have a lot of support there, a lot of money. But there could be a primary there. I was just talking to him.
And it is a district that Trump won by 5 points, so it's Democrats do have an uphill climb.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. Rod Thompson is the president of the Sarasota Republican Club, former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Zach Anderson, the political editor of the Herald Tribune.